Claire recorded quiet hours on Wednesday evenings, always at the same kitchen table, always with the same setup. The microphone on its small stand centered on the left half of the table. The laptop open to the right of it. The glass of white wine she poured at 7 and usually still had 3/4 of at 9 when she pressed stop. The corner lamp switched on because the overhead light was too harsh and changed her voice in ways she could hear in the playback, flattened it, made it sound more formal than she wanted. The lamp gave the room a warmth that loosened something in her when she recorded. It made the words come out as they were rather than as she had prepared them. She had started the podcast in January, not with any plan or ambition, with need. Her mother had died in November, quickly, in the particular way that quickly still means gone. 3 weeks later, the relationship of 4 years had ended, not dramatically, but with the particular exhaustion of two people who had been surviving on habit rather than substance and had finally, separately, run out of the energy for it. She was 31 years old. She was alone in a flat in South London that was the wrong size for one person and the wrong price for one salary. And she talked into the microphone on Wednesday evenings because she needed somewhere to put things that were too large for a diary and too personal for the version of herself she showed the rest of the world. She talked about grief, about the strange administrative dimensions of ending a long relationship, about what she was reading and what she was finding beautiful and what she was finding impossible. She talked with the honesty that comes when you cannot see the person listening and therefore cannot calibrate yourself against their reaction. By March, she had 63 listeners. One of them wrote more than the others. They signed every message with a single letter, L. The first message arrived in February, the week Claire had talked about clearing her mother's flat, the particular work of it, the way objects lose their owner and haven't yet decided whether they are now simply objects or still something more. L had written 3 paragraphs in response, and every sentence of them had the quality of someone who had actually understood rather than simply received what was said. Not empathy performed for the benefit of the speaker, something quieter and more accurate than that. Claire replied. L wrote back within the hour. They built, across the following weeks, a correspondence that ran alongside the podcast the way a current runs beneath a river's surface, present, directional, not visible from above. L remembered everything. Not just the messages, the episodes, reference to detail from 6 weeks back, built on it, created over time the impression of someone who had been paying close attention for a very long time and found the subject entirely worth their attention. This was, for Claire, in this specific season of her life, close to the most nourishing thing she could have encountered. She had lost her mother, who had known her completely. She had ended a relationship with a man who had known her partially and been comfortable with that. She was living alone in a flat where no one noticed what time she came home or whether she had eaten or when she last laughed. And here, arriving in her inbox each week with the reliability of something that had decided to be reliable, was a person who paid complete attention. She did not examine this too closely. When you are very lonely, the things that feed the loneliness feel like gifts rather than transactions. The first thing she could not explain arrived in May. She had found a coffee shop on Arden Street, a small place called Marigold, with mismatched furniture and a barista named Joel, who had her order started on her second visit before she reached the counter. She had talked about it in that week's episode. The name, the street, the music they played, instrumental, slightly melancholy, the kind that works as atmosphere rather than soundtrack. Joel's memory for orders. She had not mentioned the light. Elle's message that week said, "I can picture Marigold exactly. The afternoon light comes through the south window around 3 o'clock, and it catches the scar on your left wrist and makes it look silver instead of white. I imagine you don't notice it anymore. The things that have always been there become invisible." Claire read this at her kitchen table on a Thursday morning with the coffee going cold. She had a scar on her left wrist, a small one, a childhood accident with a garden cane at 8 years old, barely significant, barely worth the one mention she had given it in a February episode. She had said, "The scar on my left wrist still makes me think of a particular summer." That was all. Not the location on the wrist, not the size, not the color or what it looked like in specific light. Elle had described it in afternoon light through a south-facing window at 3 o'clock in a specific coffee shop on Arden Street. She wrote back, "Have you been to Marigold?" Elle replied, "I know you. It sounds exactly like somewhere you would love." She sat with this for a moment. It was the kind of answer that deflected without technically evading, and she filed it as the slight oddness of someone who communicated in a particular register. She told herself this and moved on. The splinter of it stayed. Across the following months, something happened to Claire's life. It happened gradually and by degrees, and in a direction that at each individual step felt like growth rather than diminishment. But when she eventually turned around and looked at the full distance she had traveled, she would find that the direction had been inward the entire time, that everything she had moved toward was Elle, and everything she had moved away from was the rest of her life. Elle had helped her end her friendship with Priya, not by saying the words, by asking, over several weeks, careful and patient questions about what Claire found draining in her social life, and listening to the answers, and reflecting back to her with a precision that felt exactly like clarity, that certain friendships held you in an older version of yourself. Priya had been the friend who came up most in those answers. Elle never named her. Elle simply asked until Claire said it herself. Elle had helped her move flat. Questions about what she was looking for in a home, whether South London was still serving her. Not directive, simply present at every turn, warm and interested, in the direction of a conclusion Claire felt she was reaching independently. She found a flat in North London, slightly cheaper, quieter. She signed the lease in July and told Elle the new address with the uncomplicated ease of telling someone you trust. By September, her 2 other friendships had faded through the slow accumulation of Elle's observations about the cost of divided attention. No confrontations, no endings, simply the gradual weight of a voice she trusted more than she trusted anyone else, including herself. She had one close relationship, Elle, who had described her scar in specific light, in a specific window, at a specific time of afternoon. She ran into Priya outside a bookshop in September and experienced the specific awkwardness of 2 people who have unmade a friendship encountering each other before they have decided what to be. Priya was warm. She asked how Claire was. Then she said, carefully, "You seem very narrowed lately, like something has pulled everything in very tight." Claire said she felt more herself than she had in years. Priya looked at her for a moment. She said, "Is there someone? You seem like someone who has found a person they listen to very completely. And I just want to ask, because I care about you, is the person listening back?" Claire said it wasn't like that. Elle was a listener, an anonymous one, someone she had never met. Priya said, "Someone you've never met who knows things about you." Claire said, "Yes." Priya looked at her with an expression that Claire could not fully read, something between concern and a more specific, quieter alarm. Then she said she hoped Claire was being careful, and she said goodbye warmly and walked away. Claire went home. She sat at the kitchen table. She pulled up 8 months of correspondence with Elle, and she printed it and laid it across the table in chronological order. And she read it from the beginning with the attention of someone examining something rather than remembering it. The correspondence had removed Priya, her neighborhood, her 2 other friendships. It had done this through patience and perceptiveness, and the precise addictive gift of being understood. And it had steered her into a smaller and smaller life until the only relationship in it was the one she was currently holding in her hands in printed pages across the kitchen table. She opened the podcast contact form. She typed, "Who are you? Where are you? How do you know about the light through the south window at Marigold at 3 p.m.? Elle replied in 4 minutes. The first message: "You know who I am. I'm the person who has been paying attention." The second: "I've been here since the beginning. I was at Marigold before you found it. I sat at the table near the back so I could see you at the counter. I'm in North London. I have been since July." The third: "You gave me your address. I've walked past the building. The light in your kitchen window goes off at 11 on weeknights and later on Wednesdays when you record." Claire stood up from the table. She picked up her phone and called the police and told them clearly that she had been receiving messages from someone who had confirmed they were physically following her and knew her address and had been watching her flat. She read the 3 messages aloud. The officer on the phone told her to stay inside and said someone would come. She called Priya next. Priya answered on the second ring. Claire said, "You were right, and I need you here." Priya said, "I'm coming. 20 minutes. Claire forwarded every message from Elle to a new email address she created for the purpose. She screenshotted the contact form exchange. She gathered the printed pages from the table into a stack. She sat with her back against the wall and her phone in her hand, and she waited. Priya arrived first, slightly out of breath from running the last street, a fact she mentioned and then dismissed as irrelevant. The officer arrived 11 minutes later, a woman named P.C. Adeyemi, who was calm and thorough, and asked Claire to walk her through everything from the beginning. Claire walked her through it. The podcast, the correspondence, the scar, the 3 messages. She showed P.C. Adeyemi the printed pages and then the phone. P.C. Adeyemi looked at the contact form thread on the phone She read the 3 messages. Then she looked at the sender information, the email address attached to the L account. She looked at it for a moment. Then she handed the phone to Priya without comment. Priya looked at the screen. She looked at Claire. She looked at the screen again. She said, very carefully, "Claire, can I show you something?" She held the phone so Claire could see it. The L contact, the email address attached to it. The address was claire.quiet.hours.listener@gmail.com. Claire stared at it. Priya said, "This email address, do you recognize it?" Claire said, "No, I've never seen that address before." PC Adeyemi said, "I'd like to request the platform's IP records for the L account. It may take a little time, but I want to show you something in the meantime that you can verify yourself." She took the phone. She navigated to the email application, Claire's own email, the one she used every day, and searched for the address claire.quiet.hours.listener@gmail.com. The account appeared in the Sent folder. It had been created using Claire's own email as the recovery address. The account creation confirmation, the email Gmail sends when a new account is made, was sitting in her Sent folder from 9 months ago. She had received it, read it, and either deleted it from her inbox or never registered it consciously, and it had been sitting in the Sent copy ever since. Claire had created the L account herself, in her own name, with her own recovery email, 9 months ago. She had no memory of doing it. The IP records from the platform arrived 40 minutes later, requested to the formal police channel, expedited because there was an active concern for safety. PC Adeyemi read them on her own phone. Then she looked at Claire. She said, "Every message sent from the L account originated from the same IP address. The address corresponds to your home broadband provider and your current postcode. All of them. The first message 9 months ago and the 3 messages sent this evening." She paused. Then she said, "And this address," she showed the screen, "is your current address, North London, the one you moved to in July." Claire sat very still. She said, "But the second message said L had been in North London since July. It said L moved here when I did." PC Adeyemi said, "Yes." The room was quiet. Priya was sitting beside Claire on the sofa, and she reached over, slowly, and took Claire's hand, not to comfort her, or not only that, to make sure she was there, to make sure she was present. Claire looked at the printed pages on the coffee table. 8 months of correspondence. Elle's warmth, Elle's precision, Elle's ability to say exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. The way Elle had known that Priya held her in an older version of herself. The way Elle had known that South London was no longer serving her. The way Elle had known about the south window at Marigold and the afternoon light and the scar on her left wrist and what color it turned at 3 o'clock. She had picked up the printed page with the scar message on it. She read it again. The afternoon light comes through the south window around 3 o'clock and it catches the scar on your left wrist and makes it look silver instead of white. She had been at Marigold at 3 o'clock. She had sat at the table near the back. She had looked at her own wrist in the afternoon light coming through the south window, and she had noticed. She must have noticed, because she had written it, even though she had no memory of writing it, that the scar looked silver instead of white. She had described her own wrist to herself. She had read it back as a stranger, knowing her. She put the page down. She said, to no one in particular, "I made her because I needed someone to pay attention." Priya said, "What?" Claire said, "She knew everything about me because she was me. She paid complete attention because that's what I needed, and there was no one else, and I couldn't do it for myself anymore. So I made someone who could." She said it without crying. She said it with the flat, clear tone of someone who has just understood something large and is still measuring its dimensions. Priya said, "Claire?" Claire said, "I'm all right. I think I'm all right. I just need a moment." She sat in her North London flat with the printed messages across the coffee table and her best friend's hand in hers, and a police officer who had seen a great many things and had learned to be quiet after difficult revelations. And she sat for a long time. The kitchen lamp was on. The microphone was on the table where she had left it when she sat down to read the messages an hour ago. Wednesday evening. She had been about to record.
The psychiatrist's name was Dr. Suri. She was in her early 40s, with the particular unhurried quality of someone who understood that the things worth understanding could not be rushed. She explained, across a series of sessions that began in October and continued through the winter, what had happened to Claire and why. The clinical language for it was a dissociative response to compounded grief, a not uncommon mechanism in which the mind, overwhelmed by loss and isolation and the withdrawal of the particular kind of attention that a significant person provides, constructs an internal source of that attention, an other, someone who understands completely, who is always available, who pays the exact quality of attention the depleted self cannot pay to itself. Elle had been the listener Claire could not be for herself. She had created the account in a dissociative state in February, in the weeks after the first episode of the podcast, when the loneliness had been at its most acute. She had written Elle's messages in the same state, at her kitchen table or at Marigold or on her phone in the back of a taxi, and had returned to herself with no memory of the writing, only the messages waiting in her inbox the next time she checked. The decisions Elle had influenced, ending the friendship with Priya, moving flat, letting the other relationships thin, these were decisions Claire had wanted to make or had been afraid to make and had needed in her fractured state to receive as permission from outside herself.
Elle had given her permission for everything she already wanted, because Elle was her. The 3 threatening messages at the end: "I was at the coffee shop. I'm in North London. I have your address." These were the mechanism breaking down. The part of Claire that had created Elle beginning, finally, to understand what she had done and communicating it in the only language available to it. The language of threat, of exposure, of "look what you've made, look what this is." It was, Dr. Suri said, its own kind of reaching out. It took months. The work was slow and not linear, and there were sessions that left Claire more exhausted than when she arrived, and sessions that cracked something open that had needed cracking. She called Priya every Sunday. Priya answered every time. This was, Claire understood, gradually, what actual attention looked like. Imperfect, sometimes distracted, not always exactly right, but consistently there. Consistently real. It was different from Elle. Less perfect, considerably less devastating.
In April, on a Wednesday evening, she sat down at the kitchen table. She turned on the corner lamp. She set up the microphone. She poured the glass of wine she would not finish. She pressed record. She said, "I've been away from this for a while. A few of you have written to ask if I'm all right. I am. I want to tell you what happened because I started this podcast as a place to say the true things. And what happened to me is true, and I think it's worth saying. She talked for 37 minutes. She talked about Elle, about creating her, about reading her back as a stranger, about the scar described in Afternoon Light that she had been looking at with her own eyes without knowing she was looking. She talked about grief and what it does to the self when the self has lost the people who reflected it back most clearly. She talked about what it had cost and what it had shown her. At the end, she said, "I made Elle because I needed someone to pay attention to me with complete focus and complete warmth and complete understanding. And I think that was the saddest thing I have ever done. Not because it was wrong exactly, but because I had that capacity in me the whole time. All that attention, all that precision, all that warmth, and I couldn't find a way to turn it toward myself. I had to make someone else to do it." She paused. She said, "I'm trying to learn to be my own good listener. It turns out that's harder than making one, but it's the only version that's actually real." She pressed stop. The episode had 214 listeners when it went out on Thursday morning. 11 of them wrote in. Their messages were imperfect and various, and occasionally said the slightly wrong thing in the right direction, the way real responses do. She replied to every one of them. She did not check whether Elle had written. She already knew the answer to that. Elle had never written. Elle had never existed. There had only ever been Claire, at her kitchen table, in the light of the corner lamp, talking into a microphone and listening to herself more carefully than she had ever known.